My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today I'm speaking with John Davis. He is the host of the Interaction Hero podcast. He is the corporate action hero. He does a lot of keynote speeches. He's an internationally known speaker, a comedian, an author. He's done over 4,000 performances. He's been a stuntman, a fight director, a college professor, an artistic director. Uh, you did over 100 performances in Iraq and Afghanistan, touring with the USO. You've been on the Today Show, the Discovery Channel, and multiple national and regional broadcasts. Um, I just I'm thrilled to have you on my show. Um, I've read up on you. I believe that we're uh, in alignment with our messages, and it's just great to talk to somebody that has the same mindset and the same kind of leadership philosophy. But you have um, you have a different approach to several things, and I just want to get into your leadership philosophy and uh, really maybe we should maybe we could get started with where you grew up, what your influences were, and what moments in your life kind of led you into what you're doing now.
Sure, that's actually great. Thank you for having me here. And right now, this episode that we're on right now is my 70th guest spot since the end of January.
Wow.
I'm in the middle of doing a run, as many as I possibly can. And so thanks for having me. As you said, I'm known as the corporate action hero. That name was derived for several reasons. One, the word action means create motion, to start momentum, or to do something. And the word hero is someone who achieves extraordinary result in service of others. And I find that in corporations and businesses nowadays, there's a lot of people who have lost a lot of their inner drive or inner power, and some of their self-defeating beliefs are holding them back from achieving more. So now I decided to go into companies and businesses. That's why I call myself the corporate action hero, and awaken those interaction heroes and get them moving towards peak performances really quickly. How I got to the point where I found that career was when I was a kid, I wanted to be Robin Hood. I had a stick in my hand. I was out in the woods pretending to be a sword fighter guy. But that manifested into the desire to be a fight director and a stuntman. And I ended up meeting two of the top fight directors in the country, a guy named Payson Burt and Brad Waller. And they both saw talent within me and kind of took me under their wing and put me on a new path. And I got really into learning the different fighting styles and went for my black belt in Taekwondo. And at 22 years old, I climbed up into the back of a van and I was helping a guy unload these boxes of clay. He was a professional potter, and each box was 80 pounds. And I picked up the very first box in that van, and I twisted to turn to set it outside of the van, and my spine split in two. And I collapsed onto the ground and was paralyzed. They took me to the hospital. Doctor said, "You, Mr. Davis, you have a condition known as spina bifida occulta," to which I promptly said, Gesundheit, because I had no idea what that meant. Basically, three of my vertebrae never formed properly at birth. And because they didn't form properly with the extra 80 pounds in the twisting action, I actually unscrewed the top half of my spine from the lower half. And doctor informed me that day that I might not ever walk again. And that even if I did, I would never have a physical career because my back could never do that. So basically, he was taking away all of my dreams. And during that time, someone gave me a book by Bruce Lee called The Tao of Jeet Kune Do. And out of that book, I found some great wisdom in the concepts of staying very present and leveraging your present moment. And as I started using the principles that I was deriving from that book, I eventually came out with what I call the 5 F's of achievement. It's hacking your fight or flight response to achieve more. And using those principles, I actually worked my way out of that bed and back into physical condition. And at 1 year and 6 months after my accident, I climbed up on top of a 3-story tower and I jumped off into a fall pad. And I went off and did over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting stunt shows all over the world, including the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan on 6 USO tours. After that, I worked with movie stars in Hollywood. I've climbed mountains. I've done just amazing, incredible things since then. And it's all because of the fact that um, those principles that I learned, which anybody can use for any aspect of their life. And if you're a leader, a special leader, if you understand these principles, um, because they're based in the primal fear response, everybody has the same response. So understanding from a leadership level what your team's going through, what your client's going through, what you yourself are going through, then you can hack that response and you can get amazing results very quickly.
It's awesome that you're leading into that. One of the things that I talk a lot about with many of my guests who a lot of my guests are veterans or first responders, law enforcement, firefighters. And something that I typically ask all of these individuals is uh, how do you lead in high stress environments?
Right.
And how do you catch yourself when that fight or flight response is triggered? Because if you don't have an awareness of what's going on, you can get hijacked. So maybe you can talk about your principles there.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the 5 F's. So the first of the 5 F's is fearlessness. And when you look at fearlessness, you can't look at being fearless until you take a real deep dive into what fear is. And when I ask audiences all over the world what fear is, the audiences go silent. They have no idea how to define it until somebody in the back of the room will usually say false evidence appearing real, which is the standard trope that you hear all the time. But when you break fear down scientifically, fear is just an emotional reaction to some future event that may or may not happen with you focused on a negative outcome. Because if you weren't focused on a negative outcome, you wouldn't be afraid because you'd be focused on a positive outcome, right? So it really is just negatively focused uncertainty. And when I was standing on the front lines of Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've been there when the bullets were flying, I was in a Black Hawk and they shot an RPG at me and we just missed us and actually hit the Humvee that I ate lunch in, which was an interesting story in itself. But the the idea of when I talk to those soldiers about how they can go into those stressful situations and set their fears aside, they said something really interesting to me. And it triggered a really interesting response because they said first thing they did was they exhale. They go, right? And we have to go, okay, we're going to do this. Let's do it, right? Well, on Broadway, when you take an actor, you put an actor out there on stage and they forget their lines. They are literally trained to exhale and relax all their muscles, and all of their lines naturally rush back into their head. And the reason this works is because when we drop into any fear response, no matter how fearful you are, that little, if you're a parent, you've seen your child almost fall down, you have that fear response. Well, that little gasping for air, what that is actually doing is filling your lungs up. Because most people, when they're in fear, they don't think they can catch a breath. Well, it's not that they can't catch a breath. It's that their body is holding in as much air as possible so that they can run further and faster. It's a natural primal response. And so by exhaling and relaxing the muscles, you shut off the fear response. And what happens is all of your cognitive thinking comes back online and you start to do it. So these soldiers said that they had this mechanism of exhaling before they left. And that's fear is a reaction, like I said, to a future event. Fear is also not in your present moment. It's rooted somewhere else. So by exhaling and relaxing and letting your brain cognitively kick back in, you can realize that right here, right now, I can do something. And then the soldiers then said to me, one of the ways that helps that is that we have an objective. We have something that we strive for. Or as I would say it in the 5Fs, they have something to focus on, fearlessly focus, right? Now, I can tell you from experience, when you stand on top of a 3-story tower and you're about to jump off, you're not thinking about the tower and you're not thinking about the stairs you came up to get to the tower. You're thinking about where the heck you're going to land. And that I promise you, you're looking down and you're going, okay, that's where I'm going. So you get really seriously focused on the positive outcome and the end goal. And once you get that fearlessly and focused heading in the right direction, then you have to drop into the third of the 5Fs, which is faith, belief, self-confidence, things that you can do it. Because if you come to that space and you still don't believe it, then you're just giving yourself words. You're daydreaming. You have to have that faith, that confidence that you can do it, because the next of the 5Fs takes faith to even begin, and that's the follow through. Because you will not take an action towards something you don't believe in. At least not a good action towards something you don't believe in. So you have to get fearlessly focused with faith, and then take that solid action. Once you create that motion, you've now created momentum, and now you're off and running. You're heading towards the goal, right? Something then is going to come up that's going to seem like it's derailing you. That seems contrary to what you're trying to achieve. And in that moment, you've got to stay flexible. And that flexibility is key, because let me back up just a little bit. That moment of focus, in a moment of focus, you can focus positively, you can focus negatively. And the interesting thing is, when you think about your life experience, in your conscious moment, you only have one moment where you can do, say, or think anything. Thought, word, and deed only happens in your present moment. Your subconscious mind has two jobs. One is to collect memories of your present moments to create a subconscious belief from. And the other is to help you find what you focus on. So, do you know negative people?
Absolutely.
Okay. You ever notice they always have something to be negative about?
Yep.
Right. Right. That's
Yeah.
because they're consciously focused that the world is negative. Their subconscious mind is showing them focus. Their focus, what they're focused on. It's just like when you decide you want to buy a car and you choose what kind of car you want. Before you buy the car, you start seeing that kind of car everywhere. Oh my God, look at that car. There it is again. Right.
Yeah.
Because you consciously focus on something, your subconscious mind shows it to you. So it's a deadly cycle back here, because what happens is you get consciously focused on something negative. You're now creating a negative belief. The subconscious mind shows you the negative, which creates a negative moment, which gets stacked in your subconscious belief behind you. And it creates this death cycle back here of negativity, right? The only way you get rid of that is to break it and stay very present and start stacking successful, positive moments into that subconscious belief. And once you start stacking those subconscious beliefs that are positive and successful, then your subconscious belief changes. And then of course, your focus is on something positive. So now that's helping as well, right?
Right.
The next aspect is that when you want to get to a giant goal somewhere up here, you're never going to get to it, because there's only one moment that you're going to live. That thing that you're trying to get to comes to you. You don't get to it. And the only way it comes to you is by doing things that are successful and in alignment with it here, right? And it brings it to you. Now, this whole process that I'm talking about, fearlessly focused with faith, follow through with flexibility. How does it work in leadership? Now, when I do my corporate action here keynote speech, my main speech, the last thing I do is I bring the most timid person I can find in my audience to the stage. And I literally look for the most timid person I can find. And I bring them to the stage. And I bring them on the stage. Now, as a leader, here's my job. My job is to understand where they are in the process. So I bring her on the stage. I know her biggest fear right now is being in front of her peers. So I bring her up there, and I first of all, I make her feel comfortable by I thank you so much for coming. I non-threatening, right? And if I see physical cues like her stepping back away, I step back away as well. I mirror her so I can keep that her mind feeling safe. The second thing that I do is I turn to the audience and I say, "Isn't she a rock star for coming up here?" And so her fear is that they won't accept her, and I immediately get the audience to accept her, and not only accept her but cheer her on for being better than what she thinks she can do. So now I've kind of got that mode going. Next thing I do is I know what I want her to do now, and I won't reveal that until the end of this, but um, I start talking to her about fishing, a normal, calm, serene, ordinary situation, fishing. Well, if you think about the mental state, the positive attitude of fishing, you're going to sit there, you're going to be relaxed. You're not going to be, I'm talking to her about things that are going to keep her relaxed, right? And keep her in a state. And I'm making jokes about it at the same time, making her laugh. I say, so today I'm going to teach you how to cast a fishing rod the right way. And she goes, okay. And she gets real easy into that because I haven't done anything threatening. Then I pull out a bullwhip and I hand her a bullwhip. And her first reaction is to, I said, we're just using it as a fishing rod because it's the same action. And I just negate that it's a bullwhip altogether because I don't want her thinking pain, danger, or frisky Friday night. I want her thinking that it's fishing, right? Before she can get too deep into her thought about what she's holding in her hand again, I get a whole section of the audience making a funny fish face. Like this, right? Now she's laughing at her people and her peers, and she's got the positive attitude going, right? Then I say, all you have to do is just choose which fish you want to catch and cast your fishing rod. And she does that, and the whip cracks. Kaboom, real loud. I go, oh, and then she cheers, and everybody goes crazy for her. And they do, they go nuts for her. Then I say, did you hear it crack? He goes, yeah. So you heard it crack, right? I go, so you already know how to make it crack. Now, what I just did there from a leadership standpoint was I got her to acknowledge her success. And then I shifted her timeline from learning how to knowledge of. Because I didn't say, you're learning how to crack a whip. I said, no, you already know how to crack a whip. So I've already shifted the timeline on her. So, and I did it with a little anchoring. It's neurolinguistic anchoring is what it was. By getting her to consciously declare that she did it, and then making the statement that she knows how, I anchored those two together and created a real solid anchor of belief. Next thing I did was I go, I'm throwing in something that's going to make her have to remain flexible. And what I do is I pull a target out and I hold it in my hand. Now, you instantly see her gasp for air, and she tightens right up, right? And I go, remember you already heard it crack, so you already got that. But listen to me, I promise you are not going to hurt me. Right? See, the thing is, I have to remember that I'm coming from her perspective. As a leader, I'm a leader, not a dragger. And I'm not dragging her to where I want her to be. I'm leading her, which means I have to meet her where she is to bring her along. So I had to meet her in that place. And her place was she got into a fear of hurting me, which is the natural response. And, sometimes when you're leading somebody through something stressful, you got to lie to them. I'm kidding. Right. Yeah. You have to meet them where they are and bring them along. And what happens is, okay, I said, all I want you to do now is just look, and I hold the target out. I go, look where you want to hit, and just simply cast your fishing rod. Catch it like it's a fish. And they cast their fishing rod, and they hit the target right where they looked. They never hit me. Right. I've done that probably 1,000 times. I've never been hit. And the reason that works is because of the fact that the things that mess us up is our belief and our fear. And by managing her fear all the way through as a leader, I ended up doing a couple things. I shortened her learning curve. I increased her productivity, and I increased the rate at which she achieved success. She does everything I just said in under 5 minutes.
Wow.
It's amazing. It's incredible to watch. And that person on stage, because they are a timid person, has a life changing experience. And then, of course, the team that she just did that in front of all knows that she's a timid person. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe she did it. Right. So it's huge. It's a huge reaction. But it's all about remembering as a leader, you have to remember to stay in your empathy because it's their experience. It's just like a salesperson. When you're trying to sell something, that customer is going through that same exact fear response. You have to meet them where they are. And you have to always remember it's not your sale, it's theirs. They're the one paying for it. Right. So
Right.
you're the one that has to go there and meet them where they are. The more you can stay in that empathetic place and meet them and bring them along and keep the state positive, because any success in any business is all dependent upon your weakest attitude. And if you can keep the attitude positive and high, then you can go as far as you want to go.
We kind of skipped over a couple of things that I wanted to hit on.
We can go back.
It's
That's just
it's my fault because I wanted to hear all about the five Fs.
let's get into it, man. Because we
uh,
can dig in we can dig in as deep as you want to go.
yeah. So I wanted to get an overview of your leadership philosophy. We've kind of touched on it, but as we're talking about that, I'd like you to get into the importance of communication. You touched on the empathy part of emotional intelligence, but maybe dive in to the emotional intelligence component of leadership.
Well, empathy is, as I said, the key element of all. The reality of it is that emotions are always brought out to the forefront by physical description. So, in other words, if I'm going to do a job, if I determine that the job automatically is going to be a struggle or difficult, I'm emotionally giving a power to the task itself. So my emotional response is being triggered by my choices about my choice of beliefs about that response. So if I can, as a leader, start to listen to what people are saying about their present moment experience or what they're about to go into, that gives me an opportunity to realize they're in a fear state. And once they shift into a fear state, then I can start diminishing those fears, because once I see the fear state, I can go, what are they afraid of in my mind? I'm not saying this out loud. Sometimes you do say it out loud, but you have to read those emotions. Another thing is that, remember the Beatles, whenever they saw something that was negative, they would say, oh man, isn't that a drag, or isn't that heavy, right? The physical emotional response to a negative is always going to appear heavy. And you'll see people, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z, and they go, oh, and they shrink, right? That's an emotional response that, as a leader, you have to be able to not only communicate them effectively on a verbal way, but you have to be able to communicate effectively from the triggers they're giving you, the physical communications they're giving you. And sometimes those physical communications might be as simple as they can't give you eye contact because they find you intimidating. They can't speak in full sentences because they're worried about appearing dumb. Which makes them, of course, appear dumb because that's what their belief systems is. So in emotional intelligence, Dan Goleman wrote an amazing book about it. But when you get really deep into working with people who are in very stressful situations, it comes down to a very simple thing: be empathetic and be where they are, and don't expect them to be where you are, because they're not. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what's interesting, you didn't exactly come out and say it, but you did in a sense. The communication component there, you do a lot more listening than you do talking.
Yeah, you have to, because if you're not, once again, it's their experience that they're going through, and so if you aren't listening, you can't in any way, shape, or form understand where they're coming from. And it's what's really cool about the situation. I'll give you a really interesting communication skill that I think every leader ought to just take a day or two to test themselves on. What I want them to do is go out into with their teams, and I want them to just have regular conversations without a lot of expectation, and ask them how their life is, ask them what's going on in the world. How you doing? What's happening with you? Try to just just kind of get that kind of conversation going. But then in your mind, I want you to start thinking about what is it they're saying about their present moment. Now, when they start saying things like, I'm wanting to do this, I'm trying to do that, I'm hoping to do that, I need to do this, you know, those are active present moment words that do nothing. What they actually are is a very big belief that they don't have whatever it is they're doing or whatever they're trying for, right? Um, for me, as I said, I was paralyzed. To get out of that bed, I had to take words like wanting, needing, hoping, trying out of my vocabulary to do it. I am doing this. I am creating this. As Yoda would say in Star Wars, do it or not, there is no try, right? You've got to make sure that you're not you're not saying things that are inactive. And as a leader, when I walk up to somebody and I say, hey, can I get you to do this? And they say, well, I'll try to do that. I say, no, you're going to try to do it or you're going to do it, because I'll get somebody to do it if you can't. I automatically think that way because I know if they're just going to try, I can't count on that as an outcome, right? As a leader. But I also know they are limiting themselves and giving themselves an out. And someone who is constantly giving themselves an excuse will never be as productive as somebody who says, I'm going to get it done.
We're talking about the empathetic side of emotional intelligence, and we're talking about the communication portion, where you're communicating what you want to happen, or you're asking your team to communicate with you, and you're listening, but you're paying attention not only to what they're saying, but what they aren't saying. They're communicating with their actions or their body language. And you've got to have a self-awareness as well.
Right.
Another side of that emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. If you don't understand where you are on the scale, that's why when I talk about the 5 Fs, I always give audiences on podcasts my 5 F workbook, and we'll do that today too, right? But the first part of that workbook talks about finding out where you are, because as they say on an airplane, when the airplane's going down and the oxygen mask falls, you have to put your own mask on first before you can help anybody else, right? Because if you're not solid in your leadership, it's like when you have a big giant goal set for the year and you're trying to lead a team to reach it. If you're not confident in it, you're not going to convey confidence, because people can smell fear. It's part of our natural response is to, somebody's afraid. What are we afraid about? That's why when people can walk into a room and feel that something's not right sometimes, or thick in the air, they call it. That's because our emotional triggers respond to the scent of fear. And when you look at the concept of um, understanding yourself first, you really have to look at your own words. When I work with corporate companies and CEOs, especially, C-level executives, um, one of the things I tell them to do, I say, go out and pick yourself up one of those digital voice recorders, one of those ones that records for 20 hours straight. Turn it on and stick it in your top pocket and go spend your day. And then at the end of the day, go back and fast forward and see what you said about your present moment. And you know what I find is most of them think they're too fat. They think they're not rich enough. They think they're not succeeding enough. They think they have to work all the time. They have all these things that they're struggling with. And the reality of it is, the second we started taking those thoughts, those present moment beliefs out of their present moment, they started achieving more. They started getting thinner. Their whole lives changed because they started doing things that are active. There's only, like I said before, there's only one moment you can think, do, and say anything. And if you're wasting that one moment on wanting something or needing something or hoping for something or trying for something, then you're just creating you stagnating. And that's really, you can't be a stagnant leader and expect your team to be vibrant beneath you, because of the fact that they're following your lead because you're the leader.
Yeah. Now, you touched on the book that you read by Bruce Lee, The Tao of Jeet Kune
Jeet Kune
Do,
Do.
and I think that's pretty interesting. You know, I would imagine that there's more to your story, than just reading the book and all of a sudden you're not paralyzed. So I'm sure there was some ups and downs. Could we dive into that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because
You know
I'm
that
really
whole
curious about this journey that
yeah. Let's go. Let's
happened.
go for it.
All right, cool.
Let's go
Thank you.
for it. So, in Bruce's story, you know, when Bruce wrote that book, he was in traction in a hospital and had just been told he'd never do martial arts again. So he was having the same exact story that I was having. He actually went on and did every movie that we know him for. All the big, you know, Enter the Dragon and all that. That all came after that. Even the role of Kato came after that. But in that book, he talks about many things. One of the things he talks about is being like water, being flexible. You know, we talked about the 5 F's earlier briefly. Um, the concept that something's going to come up that's going to seem contrary to what you're trying to achieve. Bruce would look at that as being like water. You flow around it, you flow over it. Sometimes you crash right through it. You wear it down over time, but it's still not stopping you from getting to your destination, right? Bruce was a fascinating guy. You know, everything I've heard about Bruce, or because you know, in stunt people I know I've met people who met Bruce and know Bruce, right? Who knew
Right.
Bruce, and he always was so driven to do as much as he possibly could, and when something didn't exist to get him where he wanted to go, he created it. You know, he was the first one who started doing protein shakes. You know, he literally took powdered milk and egg and liver tablets and crushed them, put them in there, and he had vitamins, put them in there, and he was drinking these protein shakes. Well, then Steve Reeves, the local bodybuilder, saw what he was doing, and he kind of adapted it, added banana to his and stuff like that. And then a guy named Rio Blair saw it and said, "Hey, this is an industry," and started creating this industry called protein shakes. Then Arnold and all the guys started doing it, and then the bodybuilding industry created it, and then it you know, Slim Fast saw it, you know, and then bam, 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 it created this industry. So the concept of you know, not being limited in belief is like being like water. I said earlier, your present moment is such that you have this one moment, but that subconscious belief is is behind you as this storehouse of memories and subconscious belief, right? And so when you come to an obstacle, that subconscious belief will tell you whether or not you think you can or you think you can't. And so you have to literally say, okay, this subconscious belief is also showing me what I'm focused on. So if I'm focused, as Bruce would say, where the river's going, not where the rock is, right? If the subconscious mind is showing me the rock and I'm focused on the river, then the rock is there to show me something that has to be addressed to get to the end of the river, as opposed to being something that I can believe will stop me permanently. And so you've got to realize that any obstacle is just that, an obstacle. But all obstacles are overcome if you stay mentally flexible. When I do my speeches, when I talk about flexibility, I mention Bruce and I pull out a pair of nunchucks. And if you look at what nunchucks are, they I always pronounce them wrong because we used to call them numb nuts for very specific reasons. Um, so they're not numb chucks; they're nunchucks, is what they are. Nunchaku sticks and nunchucks. And when you look at what nunchucks are, they're two sticks. They're two rigid obstacles. There's you, and then there's your obstacle. They don't bend towards each other. They don't flex with each other. The only thing that makes those two hard, rigid obstacles work together is that little bit of flexibility you put in between them. And once you start putting that little bit of flexibility in between them, a couple of things are going to happen. They're going to be able to work together and flow in a very unique way. They're going to be able to bend in ways that wouldn't naturally happen. And they're going to have multiple times the striking force by working together. So when you're working in the concepts of flexibility in your life, you realize that if something comes up that seems contrary, it's probably going to make it 5 times better in the end. And if you can keep your mindset there, you change everything in your
That's profound. I like
life.
it. Like it.
Yeah, I find so much wisdom in Bruce's words and writing. And when he did his movies, he had it in his contract that he would put some bit of philosophy in every film. And so, well, you go back and you watch his films, you see all these great sort fight scenes and all this punching, and but then there's always the one scene he puts in where he's talking philosophy with somebody. And those moments are to my favorites in the films, actually.
So along the way, from the point of where you severed your spine, and along the way, I'm sure there was some low moments. Uh, how did you overcome those moments? How did you get control over that negativity and address it and
That
overcome it?
that that's a great question. Number the first thing, yes, I went to some very dark places because I thought everything that I had dreamed of, everything I had been working towards was being taken away. Um, the first thing I had to do was I had to lean into my support system, and that I had no idea what kind of support system I had until I had my accident, and then suddenly I had family and friends that were just there. I had to lean into it. Um, the other thing that I had to do was I had to stop believing what the doctor told me. I had to not believe his beliefs to live my own. And that's a huge statement if you really think about that. Because through your life, people are going to tell you all the time what they think you should be doing or what they think you're capable of. And they're going to tell you all kinds of beliefs that they want you to take on because they believe that. And Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, I love when people tell me it can't be done because I know I'm going to be the first. Right. And that's what I had to be. I could not take on the doctor's belief because then I was living his life and not my own. And so I had to literally drop into the idea that I am going to be a stuntman. I am a fight director. That is what I'm doing. And I literally started that day and I said, right now I can't move my legs, but right now I can flex my upper back muscles. And so I started just flexing my upper back muscles and started leveraging the moment and realizing that look, I successfully moved my upper back muscles. I successfully did that, and I go a little further down my back and I'd flex that part of my back, and I became very aware of all the different pieces of my back. I'm sitting here flexing them as we do it, right? I became very aware of all the different layers of the back muscles that I could flex, and I got into my traps and my lats, and I went on down, and and the day that I was able to flex my hips blew doctors' minds because that's below the injury. They didn't know whether I was going to walk again, right? Well, obviously you're going to be fine. Um, but after I started flexing my hips, it was okay. The next thing is I got to be able to now move my thighs, move my knees, move my shins, move my ankles, move my toes, all the way down until finally I was sitting up on the edge of the bed. I was able to get myself up sitting. And then that next moment was, okay, can I stand? And I spent a day just sitting and standing. And then eventually I just started walking down the hallway, and I walked down the hallway further. And then uh, by by the time of a year, I was back to what I would consider physical normalcy. I wasn't as buff and as strong as I was before had the accident, but I was back to being a normal individual, at least at that point. And by a year and 6 months, I had built my back strength up enough and my confidence and my belief up enough that I knew I could jump off that tower and be just fine, and did. And then, like I said, I went on to do over 4,000 live comedy sword fighting stunt shows all over the world with my comedy show Hack and Slash. And none of that would have happened if I would have continued to let other people tell me what was going to happen to me. If I was continuing to believe what the doctor was. In fact, doctor wanted to put a pin in my back to hold it in place. They said, we want to make sure that the spine stays together, right? And I refused because I knew that I'm going to be a stuntman. I'm going to be a fight director. I'm going to do sword fights. And if I did that, my back would have a rigid part and I would not be able to do high falls. I would not be able to do rolls. I would not be able to do a lot of things because of the rigid part of my back. And so by not allowing him to do that, I wanted to do everything I ever wanted to do. And then what was really fascinating was because I had the experience and now the understanding of how my brain works and how I can do anything. I did everything I wanted to do. I went on to be a college professor. I ran theme parks. I did all the things that you listed earlier. That happened afterwards. That happened because now my mindset had changed. My mindset had shifted to a place. And then Hack and Slash took me to a point where I was really enjoying the time after the show more than I was on the stage, not because of any physical injury, but because of the fact that after the show, I was sharing this information about these five Fs with audience members who wanted to just hang around. And I have people who still write me today, told me I saved their marriage. I did all this thing because I was able to let them understand how to work with people and work with themselves. And so I said, let's figure this out. And then I set another goal because life is motion. And if you're not continually moving towards something, then you start to stagnate. And just like water in nature, if water is flowing downhill and moving, it's full of oxygen, it's full of life, it's very healthy. Take that same water, put it in a puddle, let it stagnate, it becomes poisonous and bugs lay their eggs in it. And stagnation kills, motion brings you alive, it makes you live. And so, you have to constantly, set a goal and reach it, you should instantly set another goal and keep going, and follow your heart. As Indian Larry, the motorcycle builder, said, do what you love and the money's going to come anyway. I have done what I've loved always, and it's taken me to 30 countries around the world. I've worked with movie stars. I've done incredible things. And it's all because of the fact that I understand how to manage my fear and how to leverage my present moment.
So, what really came to my mind as you were talking about that? Well, it struck me right towards the end of what you said. So, this moment in your life where you're paralyzed and everything's taken from you, you had one of two ways. You could have accepted that, or you could have done what you did.
Right.
And what is so interesting to me as I've studied leadership and these great leaders throughout history is not one single person who has gone on to do great things has had an easy time. Not a single one of them. They've all hit that wall or fell flat on their face, and it the same kind of moments in other people's lives have destroyed them. What was different is that these individuals picked themselves up and said, no, I'm not accepting this as my fate. And they move on. And it is that turning point. And like what you said, if not for you severing your spine, you may not have gone on to do all of the amazing things that you've done.
Right. Absolutely. And the one statement that I always like to say is today's choices are tomorrow's outcomes. And a lot of people are afraid to make choices that are quote unquote scary. Well, when I think of choices that are scary, I drop into the five F's. I go, what's the fear? What am I afraid of? And I exhale. I do the whole process. I use the process daily. Right. And the interesting thing is I look back at the back injury now and I'm like, thank God it happened. I'm really glad I mean, I have six brothers and sisters. You know, I've done more than almost, and I've got really accomplished brothers and sisters, and I've done more than all of them combined in their life. I mean, I literally have done really amazing things in my life, and it's all because of the fact that I now live limitlessly because limits are a choice. Limits are a present moment choice. I can do anything. I can achieve any goal, and I know I can. And as long as I stay in that mindset of being that kind of achiever, and see, what's interesting is the more you achieve in life, the more you want to show people how it is. And this is an interesting thing about leadership that I often find. A lot of people think of leadership as hierarchy. And I like to look at leadership a little differently. I say to my audiences, I say, if two people are leaving from the same destination to another the same destination, from the same starting point to a different destination, but one leaves 2 hours before the other one. Is the person that's 2 hours further down the road better than the person who hasn't left yet? And it's an interesting question because what it does is it makes you think about what does better mean. And because a lot of times people think of hierarchy as better or upper or lower, better or worse. You know, they look at it that way. When you look at it from the prospect of one person's just further down the road, right? Well, then I say, so is it that they are further down the road? Being further down the road, is it now their responsibility to make sure the other person sees the pitfalls and challenges along the road as they come? Or is it their job to be up there and say, "Hey, get up here"? You know, the
Right.
reality of it is leadership is going back and helping them mitigate the problems that they're going to meet as they come down the road.
Right.
And that's what leadership really is looking after those that are coming so that they can get to where they want to go. And a lot of leaders get into the ego trap of being, I'll tell you, I just had, and I almost hate to share this, but I really feel like I should share it. I had the worst customer experience of my life this past week. Um, I have lived in this house for 10, 15 years. I have tried all the pizza in this area. I'm a pizza holic, right? I love pizza. We found one place better than all the rest, loved it, and started using them 10 years ago to the point where we have Friday night pizza night every week, right? Friday night pizza night. And for 10 years, I've spent like $30 a week with this pizza place, right? And they know me by name. I'm like Norm at Cheers. I walk in there, they go, "John," I go, it's great. So that during COVID, they started using DoorDash as their delivery service, which is a great service, DoorDash. And there's a weird paperwork thing where DoorDash's receipt says root beer and pizza, but the pizza places says pizza and 2 root beers. So DoorDash shows up with 1, right? Normal thing. I call the place up, "Hey guys, they messed up the DoorDash order again." And they say, "Okay, we'll just take that off your bill." So this day, the same thing happened. I called the guy up. I said, "Hey, DoorDash messed up. I only got 1 of the root beers." The guy says, "I sent 2." I said, "Oh, I only got 1. Normally we just take it off the bill." No, I'm not going to do that because I sent 2. Right? I'm like, "Really? Really?" And then I said, "Well, I did not get it, and you owe me one of these root beers." And he says, "Well, you can come get it." And I said, "I paid for delivery." He says, "I don't care. You can come get it." That's what this guy's saying to me. I said, "Who's your store manager?" He said, "I am." Right? So he's the leadership supposedly. So I go down there and I walk into the place and I say, "I'm here for my root beer." He grabs it, sets it on the counter, says, "There it is," and he turns and walks away. I said, and oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, he hung up on me on the phone call. So I said to him, "Why'd you hang up on me?" He says, "I didn't hang up on you." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Yes, you did." He said, "Well, you called me a liar." That's what he said to me. Right. And I'm like, "No, no, I didn't." I said the DoorDash, receipt thing happened again. I said, "What's your last name?" I said, "Who's the store manager?" He says, "I am." I said, "What's your last name?" He said, "Get out of my store." I said, "What I will when you tell me your last name." He said, "Get out of my store." I said, "Tell me your last name, I'll leave." He says, "Get out of my store or I'll call the police." And eventually he goes back for it. But so finally it got to the point where I was like, I'm leaving. And as I walk out, he says, "Have a nice day." And I said an expletive back, right? So this situation, he's now supposedly the manager, which I found out he's a shift manager. He's not the store manager, right? This situation, had the guy said, "Oh, I'm sorry," empathetically, "you didn't get your root beer. Let me solve that situation." Everything would have been no issue, right? Instead, he got emotionally charged, thinking he did something wrong, and his emotional states went out of hand to the point where he then couldn't drop his hierarchy because now he moved into a position recently had moved into a position of management. So now being a ladder in management, he thought he had this new power to hold over people. So he was in that hierarchical status, and
Mm-hmm.
using the hierarchical status, it now has affected customer sales. So since then I have talked to corporate, I've talked to the stores. I said, when I do the math, I've spent over 20 grand with you people, and one oh shit wipes out 1,000 attaboys as far as I'm concerned. you know,
Yeah.
you need to show me some love on this. But anyway, the pizza story is not really the important part. The important part is the emotional aspect of it. He moved into leadership, and immediately his ego couldn't handle the leadership.
Right.
And it's the same thing with any leader. If they're thinking in that hierarchical status, then they're not a good leader, because the idea of hierarchical status, it negates a couple things. One of the things it negates is the fact that when I walk around, when I do my show, my speeches, I ask the audience, what's most important to you? I have never had anybody in 10 years of doing that speech say my job. They always say my family, right? So their security, their family, they are not accessing their what's important in through the filter of their job. They're accessing it through what's truly important, and the job is something that supports what's important to them. And so, as a leader, your job is to understand what's important to them. And if you really want them to do well by you, demonstrate how the job supports what's most important to them. And if you can shift it around that way, you suddenly have a team who are willing to go to all kinds of levels for you. Right now in the corporate world, there's a big push towards values, you know, getting this family values and this concept of we are a family. And it's really interesting because the companies who have done it for a long time, you go to those companies and you say, how long have you worked here? 23 years. How long have you worked here? 11 years. How long have you worked here? 19 years. And then you go to those companies that don't have that value system. How long have you worked here? 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. The average lifespan of a job is 4 years right now, unless your leadership is good and supportive and living and leading empathetically.
That's incredible. Yeah. Yeah. So many times organizations lose sight of that. Um, it's unfortunate.
It is. I spoke for a company here locally, and it was a very well-known company in this area. I don't want to give names because I don't want to get sued. um, but they they had a home improvement aspect of their job, their business. That's all I'm going to say, right? And they brought me in to speak to their leadership conference, and I came in and I spoke, and I did a workshop on emotional intelligence, and I also did my keynote speech, and it became very evident very quickly that there was a very negative work environment. And the more I got into the emotional intelligence aspect of it, it was because it came down from the top. The owners, the leaders were literally pitting the team members against each other. They had set up that said, you all have to compete against each other, rather than saying, hey, you all need to support each other and help get as many sales as possible. So now you had people who were not only, you know, doing anything they can to get the most sales, but they would not in any way, shape, or form help somebody else because they're competing against them. Right.
Right.
And I said to somebody after that event, that was, gosh, that event was probably 7 years ago or so. I said, I'll bet that company doesn't last very long. Right. And they were the top company in the area. And I say were because when I went to speak for them, you couldn't turn on a radio or television in this area and not have a commercial for them. You can't find them now. They're gone, right? Because they imploded. They literally crumbled with it from within. I mean, they still exist, but they're less than a quarter of the company they were, and they can't keep anybody. And the longest person who had worked at that company was he was there 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the more you can, people want to be involved in positive experiences. When I choose a person from my audience to come on stage, I never ask them. I walk on stage, I start making jokes. I step off stage, I say, I'm going to choose somebody. So the whole audience knows I'm going to choose somebody. I walk out too close to where I make jokes the whole way through, keeping the audience in a positive mood. I walk over and I tap somebody. I say, what's your name? And I start applauding and I walk to the stage and they follow me. Right. Anybody in the audience would have gotten up. Anybody would have gotten up because I created a positive atmosphere first. I gave a true expectation. I'm going to choose somebody. I basically made a contract with the room. Somebody was going to get up. And then by the time I got to them, they had the information very clearly communicated. They were in a positive work environment. And then I tapped him on the shoulder, asked his name. He said the name. And when he said the name, he knew that he was getting up. Right. That's how easy it is to lead people and get them to achieve and do more if you're creating a positive work environment. Positive work culture is the key to success.
It's so simple, yet it isn't as widespread as you would think.
Well, I think that really is the problem with it. It's so simple. People think that can't be it. It's too simple. And I'm like, no, that really is it. And that's, keep everything positive, empathetically, so, help people out. If you want to look at it from a interesting perspective, in various ancient religion cultures, Buddhist is what you think you become, you create your world. Krishna says you're the culmination of your thought. And, Jesus said, whatever you ask in God's name is granted. And Moses said, God's name was I am. So all of those are present moment thoughts. And if you as the leader can manage the present moment thoughts of your team and keeping the present moment thoughts of your team positive and focused on a positive outcome, there's no reason why they wouldn't, because a positive environment creates a situation where people want to be involved because it's positive. Second, you start creating negative, you start creating all kinds of backstabbing and all kinds of various things and gossip and everything else. First thing, if I get somebody in one of my businesses that's a gossip, I can them. And when I did theme parks, I had these actors, and that you always have that one actor who was exceptionally good, really, really good, but had such an overblown ego that he was letting everybody know how much better he was than them. And everybody thought, oh my God, he's the best. He's the only one who could do this, blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, as a leadership perspective, I look back and I go, these 5 people are really good, but they're being held down because of their belief that that person's better. And I get rid of that person, and those 5 people come up and blow that other one away. Right? Wow. 5 times better by getting, because the negative that the great one was giving was more powerful than any asset he was bringing. And you have to sometimes mitigate those too and get rid of those people as well. Yeah. Can I share a business experience I had with using the 5 F's in real time?
Absolutely.
All right. So great. Okay, so check this out. I was the artistic director of the Tennessee Renaissance Festival. And it was payday. Now, the way those festivals pay, they're usually run for 8-10 weeks, usually those festivals, and they usually pay with 2 checks, one in the middle, one at the end. And I was walking around on the site on payday, but everybody was still, the fair was on and everything was going on, but it was payday. So I'm aware of a lot of things at once. And I get that feeling, like that thick room feeling, something's not right. So I go down to the office and I walk into the office. Now, understand, I'm the artistic director. I walk into the office. There's the owner of the festival, and there is my top musician screaming at each other. Okay, so now this is a bad place for me to be because I'm the one who's in between them. I'm the middle management, right? So I turn to the bookkeeper. What the heck's going on? He says, well, the musician turned in his paperwork, but the Social Security number that he turned in was not the right Social Security number. And the IRS contacted us and told us to hold 30% of his pay. And today he got a check that was 30% light. And I said, oh, okay. So now, first thing I did, as I said, as I walked in, is I got information before I put any of my whole thought process into it. because I can't really decipher a solution without understanding the situation. So my job now is to, number one, negate the fear. Number two, offer a solution. So I formulate a solution. I turn to the owner of the festival. And before I turned to him, I walked into the middle of the argument and I said, guys, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. And they went, what? Right? Because their fear was it was their fault, right? The owner was afraid the IRS was gonna come down on him. The musician was afraid he wasn't gonna get paid. So they were both in a fear mode. So by me coming in and saying this is my fault, I took the fear away from them because now it's my job to solve the problem, right? The whole fight stopped at that point. There was no more arguing at that point. I turned to the owner and I said, he's on one single contract with us. Can we give him his full check today and take the entire 30% of the one contract out of his final check? Yes, we can. I turn to the musician. I say, you are going to get your entire check today. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to show up at your campsite because he was staying at a camping park, a travel trailer. I said, I'm just going to pick you up. We're just going to drive down to Social Security, give you a copy of your Social Security card. We'll bring it back here. We'll do a Xerox copy of it. And then the paperwork's right. And then you'll get your full check at the end too. So I offered solutions, right? I negated their fears. I got them to stay flexible to think about my solution. I got them fearlessly focused on the outcome. Put faith in it. And the way I put faith in it with the musician, I had a lot of faith already banked with the owner because I had increased his festival by 60% that year. So he was very happy with me at that point. But the way this thing happened with the musician was that next morning I was at his campsite and I did pick him up. I followed through my word. And so he had faith in it. Right. So what eventually happened was everything got resolved. Everything was fine. The guy worked at that festival for years to come. Right. But the idea was I, as a leader, had to come in and negate the fear, get them focused on a solution, give them faith in the outcome. So fearlessly focused with faith. Then I had to follow through on my actions. Right. And the flexibility didn't even have to come into play at this point because of the fact that we had already been flexible because they were flexible enough to listen to me. Right. Yeah. So that's how it works in that kind of situation. And it resolved all the problems in one fell swoop. But I didn't let my emotional state get in the middle of it. I kept my emotions out of it.
So I like the part of that where you gathered the appropriate information to be able to have a solution before intervening.
Right. You can't intervene into something you don't know anything about. Yeah. And all I knew when I walked into that room was they were screaming at each other. So I can't give a solution if I don't have a problem. So the deal is to get you educated first. It's like when I went from being a comedy sword fighting stuntman to working in corporate America, my biggest fear was how they're going to take this guy who wears tights and lives in the woods seriously, right? And I realized after the third speech I should stop wearing the tights. I'm kidding. but I had to get over that fear, that process of it. So the first thing I did was I really educated myself on the business of keynote speaking, on how to become a speaker. And now, granted, I was very fortunate. One of my very close friends is Dan Thurman, who is one of the world's most famous keynote speakers out there. He was head of the National Speakers Association, president there for a while, and he and I've known him since he was 19 years old. So I had a good resource right there. But he was my resource. He was an educational resource, right. and still is today. I go to Dan all the time. But it comes down to the idea that you have to have information before you can offer solutions. And sometimes, like in this situation, as soon as the bookkeeper told me that the IRS was going to hold 30% of his pay, my first thought was, we have one contract. Having one contract makes the whole thing easy.
Right.
Right. So that's what I ended up doing. And I just, was offered the solution, which solved both of their problems at once because now he wasn't afraid of the IRS and he got his full pay. So it was all good. But yeah, you do have to educate yourself first.
Yeah, and what strikes me as the alternative is engaging and allowing your emotions to drive your interaction with them.
Right.
And
I call it being an action hero rather than a reaction zero.
uh,
You literally don't want to go in there and be reactive because if you're in a reaction zero mode, you are giving way to letting your fear run wild. And the biggest fear that most people have is being accepted. Being to put it in a less corporate word, being loved in some form. You know, being accepted, being acknowledged, and the one of the biggest issues in the whole situation was that you know they both had triggers that were popping up from their lives. He was afraid of government getting in because the owner was in a over 10-year battle with the state over the problem that he built a castle on the side of a mountain, and then the state hired a company to come through and blast a road through the mountain and damage the castle's like over $250,000 worth of damage to the castle. And then the guy who did the explosive work disappeared because he didn't have any licenses. And so there was this big giant battle for a decade.
wow.
And so he was gun shy about dealing with the government in general. And then he, of course, was gun shy because the reason this is just an opinion, the reason he falsified his things because he was what I would call a fringe dweller. He hadn't paid taxes in years, probably. You know what I mean. So he was a you know a musician. Let's just put it that way. Not to be derogatory, but but he was one of those musicians. Let me put it that way.
All right. So uh, throughout our conversation here, one thing that um, we didn't exactly touch on, but uh, really you said it in not so many words, but one of the things that I talk about that's so important when leading people is through your actions letting them know that you care about their success.
Absolutely. That's that whole empathy piece.
Right.
The thing is, you don't, as a leader, your job is to create dynamic team members. Now, if you're creating dynamic team members, that means they're upwardly mobile. And sometimes upwardly mobile means outwardly mobile. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay with the fact because people there's an interesting comment. People will raise to the level of their own incompetence. And basically, what that means is they'll come up and they'll do a great job and they'll get moved up. They'll do a great job and they'll get moved up. And they'll do a great job and they'll get moved up. And they'll keep moving up until they don't do a great job. Right. And when they stop doing a great job, then they either languish in that job forever, or someone comes along who bypasses them, and it ends up getting really bad. The thing is you want to keep creating more and more dynamic people, and you want to make sure that it's not just them. Oh, he can do that job well, move him into this job. Move him into this job. It's not just that one job oriented. You've got to look at that person as someone who can do anything, and find their talents, find their gifts, and move them forward. The interesting thing that I find in life in general is the word mastery. People say mastery, and it's like any business. Any business is constantly growing. Systems, processes, technologies, new training styles, new concepts are constantly being brought into business. And so change is a constant, and no great outcome has ever happened without change. But people who get into the word mastery, I find interesting because what they believe mastery, what many believe mastery is the concept of learning everything about one thing and doing it to its fullest. And that's not what mastery is, because mastery is not um, the full awareness of the skill set. Mastery is understanding it well enough to add to it, to improvise along with it. Because if you're not growing the skill, someone's going to come up behind you who is growing the skill, because the skill is going to be continually growing. So in mastery, you have to be you become part of the person who is taking it to the next level. I practice with nunchucks a couple hours every day because I use them in my speeches. And people look at me and they go, "Oh, you're a master." I don't consider myself a master. I consider myself an improviser, right? Because there's some things I don't do because I just don't like the way it looks, you know, because I'm a showman, right? But I do things. I do things. People go, how did you do? I do nunchucks with my feet, and I do nunchucks where I literally throw it on my neck and it slide it down my arm and take it off and spin and do all the crazy things. But that only happened because I spent time improvising and trying new things, experimenting. You know, mastery is constant motion, and leadership is constant motion. And bringing up dynamic people, you want them to be creating new things or bringing you new ideas and letting the skill sets grow, because the more they build the skills, I'll tell you what, the person who's on the front line who's really good at their job, they probably know multiple ways to make it easier, and you don't, because you're not in that job every day, right? So it literally comes down to listening to the people who are dynamic and then keeping the communication clear and open enough that they feel free to tell you, you know, and sometimes going over and saying, "Hey guys, how can we make this easier for you guys?" That's a simple question. What if they said something like this, and you took that knowledge and you went, "Okay, can we do that? What are the pitfalls and challenges of that? Oh, that would work really well. Okay, let's do that." You know, but you might all be able to say, "Well, if we do that, this would happen here, and this would cause another backlog there." You know, so you can at least explain it to them. But having that opening, free communication does a couple things. Number one, it helps the business. Number two, it makes them feel respected. As we said earlier, it makes them feel that feeling of giving value. And you know, there are times when I was directing theme parks, or people would come up to me with the dumbest ideas. But I really, you know, acknowledged the fact that they came up to me, you know, "Hey, John, I have an idea what we can do in the joust list when the joust isn't on." I go, "Really? What? We can get some flying squirrels and they can blah, blah, blah." I'm like, What? Right? Flying squirrels. What are you talking about?" You know, but I didn't say it that way. I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. Well, I'll think about that." Right now, I know when they said it wasn't going to happen, but there's no way in hell I'm going to knock them down for it, because they brought me an idea, good or bad. It was an idea. It was them showing me the initiative, and I want to build dynamic people. That's the goal for any good leader.
That's awesome. So you are in the process of your first book.
Be an action hero, not a reaction zero. I've kind of plugged it in there earlier.
And when do you expect that to be available?
I'm expecting this fall. It's on its fourth edit right now. Um, I want to make sure that when I bring it out, that it brings the best value it possibly can, and I don't want to have to go back and re-edit anything. And so it should be out by then. But right now, I said earlier I would give your audience a gift. If they go to corporateactionhero.com/gift, they can find that 5F workbook that's there. But if they want like daily motivation, they can also, on my website, they can find my my vlog, which is daily motivation. But what that vlog is also, it's basically my videos from my YouTube channel, because I put out a piece of daily motivation, and it's just basically I have a whole series of quotation books over here, and I just go through and I find ones that I find interesting or that spark a thought. Sometimes I don't agree with the quote, but I will, you know, just expand on what my beliefs are about it and just give you something to think about and empower you for the day. So if they're interested in daily motivation for me now, that's a real quick and easy way to get some.
Awesome. Well, I will put a link to your website in the show notes, and I'll be looking for your book this fall. And I can't thank you enough for agreeing to come on. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been really fun. I hope that anybody who's out there who's listening will take what we just said and put something into action, because your present moment is where you succeed. Your success isn't going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen right here, right now.
Yeah. And just to play on that and link it to the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, Taoism, uh, one of the one of the things that I think it's attributed to the Tao Te Ching, but it says something like this: if you live in the past, you'll be depressed. If you live in the future, you'll be anxious. But if you live in the present, you'll be at peace.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the Tao itself just means the way, and that is the way.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.